You're not even half the man my father is." Those words, sharp as broken glass, cut through the quiet of my dining room as my daughter-in-law Melissa pushed her plate aside. I froze, the taste of the beef stew I had prepared with such care turning bitter in my mouth. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second pounding like a hammer against my chest. At 72, I thought I had learned to live with silence, with sacrifice, with the small indignities that come from growing old. But this was different. This was not the ache of age. It was betrayal delivered straight to my face, in my own home. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. My son Daniel's eyes darted nervously between his wife and me. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. That silence, his silence, wounded me more than Melissa's insult ever could. I wanted to believe my years of devotion, the sacrifices I had made, would mean something. Instead, I was left staring at two people who had been living under a roof I secretly paid for month after month, all while treating me as if I were nothing more than a burden. What they didn't know, what they were about to discover, was that this quiet old man had finally reached his breaking point. Before we continue, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. I remember clearly how it all began, months before Melissa's words shattered the last bit of patience I had left. Daniel had shown up at my doorstep one rainy afternoon, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red from crying like he was still the little boy who used to run to me when the world felt too heavy. He told me he'd lost his job, that the mortgage on their townhouse at 58 Westfield Avenue was months behind, and that he and Melissa might end up on the street. I can still hear the way his voice cracked as he pleaded, "Dad, just until I get back on my feet. Please, don't tell Melissa." She doesn't need to know. My heart clenched in that moment, because no matter how many years passed, a father's instinct never fades. I thought about the decades I had spent working as a carpenter, sanding wood until my hands cracked, saving every spare dollar in a coffee tin in the cupboard, dreaming that one day my savings might give me some peace of mind in old age. But Daniel's desperation disarmed me. Without hesitation, I opened my savings account and began covering their mortgage $1,200 every month plus fees, each payment a silent reminder that my love for my son outweighed my own comfort. For 7 months, I cut back on everything: medicine for my aching knees, fresh meat at the butcher, even the small joys like my weekly crossword subscriptions. I told myself it was worth it, that once Daniel found stable work again, he would be grateful. I convinced myself that keeping the secret from Melissa was about sparing her pride, when in truth I was shielding my son from the shame of admitting he couldn't provide for his own household. But as the weeks went by, I began to notice little things that gnawed at me. Melissa would post photos online from expensive dinners, shopping trips, new shoes, and spa days, while I counted coins to buy bread. Daniel, who claimed he was struggling, never once hinted at cutting back. They lived as if nothing had changed while I starved my own life to keep theirs afloat. And still, I kept quiet, swallowing my frustration in the hope that eventually the storm would pass. The night of the dinner was supposed to be different. I had woken early, prepared Daniel's favorite beef stew, baked an apple pie the way his mother used to make before she passed, and set the table with the china I rarely brought out. It was a small ritual of love, a father trying to remind his son of where he came from, of the family bond that had carried us through so many hardships. When they arrived, Melissa stepped in with her designer heels clicking on the hardwood, her perfume heavy in the air, and her smile as polished as glass. Daniel avoided my gaze, fiddling with his phone as if the device could protect him from the tension that clung to the room. Through dinner, Melissa's comments came like little jabs cloaked in sugar. She compared my modest home to her parents' villa, scoffed at my furniture as if handcrafted oak was beneath her, and even mocked the stew for being a bit too simple. Each word landed heavier than the last, but I bit my tongue, determined not to let her provoke me. Until dessert, I brought out the apple pie, golden and warm, hoping it might soften the mood, a reminder of sweeter days. But instead, Melissa leaned back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction, and delivered her dagger. "You're not even half the man my father is." My hands trembled as I held the pie server, frozen in midair, and for a moment I felt every year of sacrifice collapse into a single point of humiliation. That was when I snapped, not with anger, but with a cold clarity I hadn't felt in years. I told her that if her father was such a great man, perhaps he should start covering their mortgage, the $1,200 I had been paying every month while they lived comfortably on my dime. The silence that followed was thunderous. Daniel's eyes went wide. Melissa's face drained of color, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control return to me. They thought I was weak, that I would forever bear the weight of their irresponsibility in silence. But in that moment, they realized the truth. The quiet old man they underestimated had finally found his voice, and he was done being their safety net. Daniel's face turned as pale as the tablecloth, his lips quivering as he tried to form words that refused to come. Melissa's proud smile collapsed into something twisted, part fury, part disbelief, like she had just seen the walls of her carefully constructed world crumble. "What mortgage?" Daniel finally burst out, his voice breaking, the same voice that once called me his hero when he was a boy. I didn't flinch. I looked directly into his eyes and said with a calm that surprised even me, "The mortgage I've been paying every month since February, $1,200, plus the extra fees the bank charges, all taken from my account, not yours. The roof over your head, the dinners you share, the warm bed you sleep in that's been mine to provide, not yours." The words hit like cannon fire. Melissa gasped, clutching her chest as if I had personally struck her. Daniel collapsed into his chair, his body slumping as though the truth had stolen the strength from his bones. For a long, heavy moment no one spoke. Only the sound of the kitchen clock ticking in the distance dared to fill the silence. Melissa found her voice first, though it had lost its sharpness. I didn't know," she stammered, her eyes darting toward Daniel, searching for an ally, but finding only the pale mask of his shame. She reached for him, but he pulled away, his hands shaking. He looked at me with desperation, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Dad, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me you were doing this?" I felt my jaw tighten as years of suppressed sacrifices rose within me. "Because when you came to my door sobbing, telling me you couldn't even buy bread, I believed helping you was what a father was supposed to do. I thought it was temporary. I thought you would recover, and someday you would look back and thank me for standing by your side. But instead, you let your wife humiliate me, let her compare me to her father, while all along it was me keeping you afloat." Tears burned my eyes, but they were not tears of weakness. They were born of rage, disappointment, and the kind of pain that etches itself into bone. Melissa tried to interject, her voice trembling. "Surely. Harold, you can't blame me. Daniel never told me the truth." I raised my hand sharply, cutting her off. "I don't want your excuses. You sit here in my house, wearing dresses worth more than my monthly groceries, sneering at the furniture I built with my own hands, while I sell the last keepsakes of my late wife just to pay for your comfort. Do not tell me you are innocent in this. Ignorance is no excuse for arrogance." The venom in my tone made her recoil, her bravado shrinking into silence. Daniel buried his face in his hands, rocking slightly, as though the weight of reality had finally crushed him. His shoulders trembled, and when he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "Dad, I lost my job 3 weeks ago. I didn't know how to tell you. I let Melissa keep spending, pretending everything was fine, because I was ashamed." Melissa snapped her head toward him, her eyes blazing with fury. 3 weeks? 3 weeks you let me spend money we don't have while you lied to me?" Her voice cracked into shrill hysteria. Daniel tried to respond, but his words dissolved into broken sobs. I sat there watching them unravel, feeling both a grim satisfaction and a hollow sorrow. For months I had carried their burden, and now, finally, they were being crushed by the weight of their own lies. My chest ached, not from weakness, but from the terrible clarity that this was the family I had sacrificed everything for. I thought of the nights I went to bed hungry, the mornings when I stretched aching joints without the medicine I couldn't afford, the day I parted with the golden watch that was the last piece of my wife's memory. Also, my son and his wife could live in comfort, only to repay me with contempt. The anger surged again, and I rose from my chair slowly, each movement deliberate. "Starting tonight," I declared, my voice steady and cold, "I am done. No more payments. No more sacrifices. You have 30 days until the bank expects its money, and if Melissa's father is such a great man, perhaps he'll enjoy proving it by taking care of your responsibilities. Because I won't. Not anymore." The color drained completely from Melissa's face. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Daniel looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, the realization of what my decision meant finally sinking in. And in that moment, standing in my dining room surrounded by the echoes of 1,000 meals once shared with laughter and love, I knew I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I was no longer just a father sacrificing everything for his child. I was a man reclaiming his dignity, even if it meant watching his son's world collapse. Daniel's eyes widened with the kind of fear I had only seen once before, when he was a boy who broke his arm falling from a tree and realized for the first time that pain could be unbearable. But now the pain was not in his arm. It was in the life he had built on lies that was about to collapse under its own weight. "Dad, you can't do this," he begged, his voice desperate, cracking like an old record. "We don't have the money. I thought I'd have more time." His words came out like a confession, and Melissa's head whipped toward him, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. "More time? More time for what, Daniel? More time to let me spend like a fool while you knew the truth? Do you have any idea what I bought this month alone?" Her voice rose to a shriek, the polished veneer peeling away to reveal the raw selfishness beneath. She slammed her manicured hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "Yesterday, I bought a pair of $600 shoes. Last week I paid for a spa weekend. I've been living like everything was fine because you lied to me." Her mascara was smearing, her lips trembling, and for the first time since she entered my home, she no longer looked like the confident woman who had sneered at my furniture. She looked like someone terrified of losing her illusions. Daniel buried his face in his hands and let out a groan that came from deep inside his chest. "I didn't know how to stop it," he muttered, his voice muffled. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth, Melissa. I didn't know how to tell anyone." I stepped forward, leaning heavily on the back of my chair, my voice low but sharp enough to slice through their chaos. "The truth, Daniel, is that you've been fired 3 times in the last 2 years. You've spun excuse after excuse, companies downsizing, bad luck, bosses with grudges, but the real problem isn't the world, it's you. You've been hiding behind lies, behind your wife's arrogance, behind my sacrifices. And I enabled it." My words made him flinch as if each syllable were a lash across his back. Melissa turned on me then, her eyes narrowing, her voice high-pitched and trembling. "You're his father. Fathers don't just walk away. Fathers support their children no matter what." I straightened, my back aching but my resolve firm. Being a father does not mean being a permanent bank account. It does not mean letting your grown son and his wife humiliate you while you sell your dead wife's keepsakes to keep them housed. Being a father means teaching responsibility, respect, independence, and in that I have failed. Tonight, that failure ends. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. Melissa laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You think you're teaching us a lesson? All you're doing is sentencing us to live on the street. Do you really want that guilt on your conscience at 72? I met her gaze and felt the old fire in my chest that I thought had died with my wife. "No, Melissa. The guilt is not mine. The guilt is yours for spending money you never earned, for sneering at the man who paid your bills, for mocking the roof over your head while believing it was your husband who provided it. The guilt is Daniel's for lying, for letting me bleed myself dry, for watching you disrespect me while knowing the truth. My conscience is clear, because I gave more than I ever should have." Daniel looked up then, his face streaked with tears, his body trembling. "Dad, please, I'll change. I swear I'll change. I'll find work. I'll take responsibility. I'll do anything. Just don't abandon us." His words were frantic, a mixture of shame and desperation, but I shook my head. "This isn't abandonment, Daniel. This is liberation for you and for me. You have 30 days to find a way to stand on your own. After that, you will either rise or fall, but it will be by your choices, not mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. Melissa sat rigid, twisting her napkin until it tore in half, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. Daniel stared at me, searching for the father who once rescued him from every scrape and stumble, but that father was gone. In his place stood a man who had given enough, who had finally remembered his own worth. And as the clock ticked in the background, I realized that this night, painful as it was, would mark the beginning of something none of us expected: the unraveling of illusions, the confrontation with truth, and the first step toward a future where I was no longer just the exhausted provider, but a man reclaiming his dignity. I could see Daniel's lips quivering as he tried to speak, but when the words finally came, they were small, fragile, the kind of words that crumble the moment they leave the mouth. "Dad, I never wanted it to be this way. You insisted on helping. I didn't ask you to give up so much." His attempt to rewrite the past ignited something inside me, something raw and uncontainable. My voice rose with a fury I hadn't known I still carried. "You came to me sobbing like a child, Daniel. You told me you couldn't afford bread, that Melissa cried every night because the bills were piling up. What kind of father would I have been to close the door on you? Don't you dare tell me," I insisted. I could feel my chest heaving, my heart pounding like a war drum, but I didn't stop. The floodgates had opened, and decades of sacrifice poured out in words. "For 7 months I've eaten beans and rice for dinner while you and Melissa ordered steak at restaurants. I've worn the same pair of worn-out boots until the soles split while she bought designer shoes that cost more than my entire grocery bill for the month. And last week, Daniel, do you know what I did?" He looked at me with wide, wet eyes, his hands trembling on the table. "What did you do, Dad?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I clenched my fists, the memory cutting through me like glass. "I sold your mother's wedding ring, the one I kept hidden away in a box for 20 years after she passed. The ring she wore the day she promised to share her life with me. My most prized possession, the last tangible piece of the woman I loved. Gone. And do you know why? So you could keep living in that townhouse, pretending you were a man who could provide, while I stripped myself of everything that ever mattered." My throat burned. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness, they were tears of rage, betrayal, and unbearable grief. Melissa gasped, covering her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting to Daniel with an expression that for once wasn't contempt but genuine horror. You let him do that? You let your father sell his wife's ring to cover our mortgage?" Her voice was shrill, trembling, as though even she couldn't process the cruelty. Daniel collapsed forward, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, his sobs muffled but raw, and for the first time I saw not a grown man but the broken, frightened boy he had become. "I didn't know he'd go that far," he choked out, his words strangled by shame. "I thought it was temporary. I thought I'd fix it before he had to sacrifice more." I slammed my fist against the table, the sound echoing through the dining room like a gavel. "Temporary? Daniel, 7 months is not temporary. 3 lost jobs in 2 years is not temporary. Selling the last memory of your mother is not temporary. This is who you have become, a man so comfortable being rescued that he no longer knows how to stand on his own." Melissa leaned back in her chair, her face pale and streaked with tears, her arrogance stripped away. I didn't know," she stammered again, but I cut her off with a glare that froze her in place. "Of course you didn't know, because Daniel preferred to lie to you, to let you believe he was the provider, the hero, while hiding behind my money. And you were happy to believe it because it allowed you to live in your little fantasy where you were superior to everyone else." My voice dropped to a low growl as I spat out the word that had festered in me for months. "Mediocre, both of you. You wanted me to believe you were better, but you are nothing more than mediocre parasites, feeding on the life I built with my blood and sweat." Daniel flinched at the word, his sobs growing harsher, while Melissa's face hardened again, her pride rearing its head despite her tears. "Don't talk to us like that," she snapped, though her voice lacked conviction. "We're family." "Family doesn't abandon each other." I leaned forward, my eyes boring into hers, my voice sharp as steel. "Family is built on respect, on loyalty, on honesty. You've given me none of those things. You've given me insults, contempt, and lies, so don't you dare use the word family as a weapon. I have carried this family on my shoulders for far too long, and tonight I lay that burden down." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of truth pressing on every corner of the house I had lived in for decades. The clock ticked louder, the air thicker, as Daniel sobbed quietly and Melissa twisted what was left of her napkin between her fingers. And for the first time in years, I felt something strange and powerful, a sense of release, of liberation, as though chains I hadn't realized were binding me had finally shattered. Melissa finally snapped out of her stunned silence, her voice trembling but still carrying that familiar edge of arrogance that had grated on me since the day I met her. "This is ridiculous, Harold," she said, her cheeks blotched red and her eyes blazing, though they were wet with tears. "You're his father. Fathers don't just stop supporting their children. My father would never abandon me like this. My father would never humiliate me in front of family." I rose slowly, my knees aching but my resolve stronger than it had been in years, and I stepped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet my gaze. My voice came out low, sharp, dangerous. "Never tell me what kind of father I should be. I've been a father for 35 years. I sacrificed my youth, my dreams, my body, my money, my health for Daniel. I gave him everything I had and more. What has your father sacrificed for you, Melissa? His credit card bill? His vacation home? You dare to compare me to him while you sit at a table I built, under a roof I pay for, eating food I cooked, wearing shoes that cost more than my entire monthly groceries? You have no idea what sacrifice means." She shrank back slightly, her lips parting as if to respond, but nothing came out. Daniel finally lifted his head, his face streaked with tears, his eyes swollen and desperate. "Dad, stop," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Don't say that you failed. You didn't fail. I failed. I let you down. I let Mom's memory down. I let myself down." His confession poured out like water breaking through a dam. He pushed his chair back, pacing the floor like a man trapped in a cage. "The truth is, I've lost more jobs than I ever admitted, not just the 3 I told you about. 4 jobs, maybe 5, in the last 2 years. I made excuses every time downsizing, bad bosses, bad luck. But the truth is, I got fired because I stopped trying, because I thought you would always be there to rescue me. I didn't push myself because deep down, I knew I could fall back on you. I've been living like a spoiled child when I'm 35 years old." Melissa turned toward him, her mouth falling open. "You lied to me?" she demanded, her voice sharp with betrayal. "You let me believe you were unlucky when you were just incompetent?" Daniel shot her a look, raw and wounded. "Don't act like you didn't encourage it. You loved the money, the gifts, the lifestyle. You loved believing I was the provider when it was Dad. You never asked questions because you didn't want the truth. You wanted the fantasy." Melissa recoiled as if he had slapped her hand flying to her chest, but for once she had no retort ready. The silence between them was suffocating, thick with years of unspoken resentment suddenly laid bare. I stood there watching them, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and sorrow, and then I said the words that had been clawing at my throat. "Daniel, I loved you so much that I blinded myself to the man you were becoming. Every time you stumbled, I picked you up. Every time you failed, I shielded you from the consequences. And in doing so, I stole from you the chance to grow. I turned you into a man who depends on lies and handouts. That's on me. But tonight it ends. I will no longer rob you of responsibility by paying your debts. If you're going to rise, it will be on your own legs, not on my back." Daniel's knees buckled and he sank back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. "I don't know how," he whispered. "I don't know how to be the man you want me to be." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay firm. "Then you learn. You figure it out. You've had 35 years of shelter. You've had every advantage I could give. Now you take that and you make something of yourself, or you lose it all. That's what life is, Daniel. It's brutal, it's unforgiving, but it forces you to grow if you let it. And if you don't, it chews you up and spits you out. That's the choice every man has to face." Melissa stood abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor. Her voice was shrill, desperate, her mask cracking completely. "This is a nightmare. You can't just leave us with nothing. Where are we supposed to go if you stop paying? A shelter? A cheap apartment in some rundown neighborhood? I will not live like that." I turned to her, my voice as cold as winter steel. "Then go live with your superior father. Surely a man of such greatness will be happy to keep you in designer shoes and spa treatments, but don't look to me. I've given more than enough." She glared at me, her chest heaving, but I could see the panic rising in her eyes. For the first time, she realized the safety net she had counted on was gone, and there was nothing she could say to weave it back. Daniel lifted his head then, his voice breaking but steady in its confession. "Dad, she's right about one thing. We don't have anywhere to go. But that's not your fault. It's mine. I let it get this bad. I let her believe lies. I let you sacrifice until you had nothing left. I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, give me the chance to prove I can change." His words hung in the air, raw and desperate, and I felt something stir in me, not the urge to rescue, not the blind love that had guided me before, but a cautious flicker of compassion, a recognition that perhaps for the first time he was seeing the truth. I nodded slowly, my heart heavy. "One chance, Daniel. Not another safety net, not another sacrifice. Just one chance to stand on your own and prove you're the man you claim you can become. If you waste it, I won't be here to catch you again." And with that, the house fell silent, the weight of my ultimatum pressing down on us all, a line drawn so deep it could never be erased. The silence in that dining room clung to us like smoke after a fire, thick and suffocating, yet strangely clarifying. Daniel sat slumped, his hands gripping his hair as though he could rip the shame out of his scalp, while Melissa stood rigid, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but unbroken, and for the first time in years I felt the weight on my chest begin to ease. My voice came out low, steady, but it carried the gravity of a confession long kept. "There's something I haven't told either of you," I said, watching their heads snap toward me. Melissa narrowed her eyes suspiciously, while Daniel's expression was one of wary curiosity. I folded my hands together and let the truth roll off my tongue slowly, each word deliberate. 3 weeks ago, I received a phone call, a voice from my past, one I hadn't heard in nearly half a century. Her name is Evelyn Carter. Daniel frowned, the name clearly unfamiliar, while Melissa's lips twisted in irritation, as though even hearing about another woman was somehow an affront to her control. I continued, ignoring their reactions. "Evelyn was the woman I loved before I met your mother. We were young, full of dreams, ready to take on the world. But when she moved west to chase a career in journalism, I stayed behind because I was afraid of leaving everything I knew. I chose stability, your mother, this life. I don't regret that choice, but I've often wondered what might have been if I had been braver." My voice softened for a moment, but then I straightened, the energy returning to my words. "Evelyn found me through an old friend. She called and we talked for hours, about the lives we built, the losses we endured, the dreams we sacrificed. And do you know what she told me? That she's alone now, widowed, and that she's been thinking about the one who got away. Me." Daniel blinked, clearly stunned, while Melissa scoffed openly. "What does that have to do with us?" She snapped, her tone sharp with disdain. I turned my gaze on her, calm but piercing. "It has everything to do with me. For 35 years I have lived for others, your mother, until she passed. You, Daniel, every bill, every struggle, every sacrifice. I forgot who Harold was before he became husband and father, and eventually just a crutch. Evelyn reminded me that I am still a man with value, with stories, with dreams. She invited me to visit her in Portland, to see the Pacific Ocean, to meet her children, to remember what it feels like to live for myself." Melissa let out a bitter laugh, high and mocking. "So what, you're just going to run off like some lovesick teenager at 72? People will laugh at you. You'll look pathetic." I met her sneer with a small smile that held no fear. "Let them laugh. I'd rather be laughed at for chasing a dream than pitied for rotting away in silence. For the first time in decades, someone sees me not as a provider, not as a burden, but as a man worth knowing, and I intend to see where that leads." Daniel finally found his voice, though it was unsteady. "Dad, are you saying you're leaving? You'd just walk away from all of this?" I looked around the room, at the furniture built with my own hands, at the photographs on the wall that captured moments of love now poisoned by betrayal, at the son who had become dependent, and the daughter-in-law who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. "Yes," I said firmly, "I would walk away. Because what is here for me anymore? Disrespect? Lies? A son who only calls when he needs rescuing, and a woman who mocks me in my own home? I have given enough. If I stay, I will wither. If I leave, maybe I will finally live." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes brimmed with tears again, but this time they weren't only of shame, they were of fear. Fear of a future where his father no longer bore his burdens. Melissa broke the moment with a furious outburst, her face contorted. "This is absurd. You can't just abandon us for some old flame. You'll regret it. She's probably just after your money. Men like you are easy prey. I chuckled, a sound that surprised even me, low and rich with defiance. My money? Melissa, I've spent the last 7 months pouring every dollar I had into your mortgage. I have nothing left for anyone to steal. If Evelyn wanted money, she came to the wrong man. What she wants is my company, my conversation, my presence. And that is something you've both made clear you do not value. Daniel pushed himself to his feet, his hands trembling as he reached across the table. Dad, please, don't go. I know I've been weak, I know I've lied, but I can change. Don't give up on me yet. His desperation pulled at something deep within me, but I held firm, knowing the pattern too well. Daniel, this isn't about giving up on you. This is about not giving up on myself. I will always be your father, but I will not continue to be your crutch. You must walk on your own, or you will never become the man you're meant to be. Melissa glared at me, her voice sharp and venomous. And what if she rejects you, Harold? What if she laughs at you, uses you, and tosses you aside? You'll come crawling back to this house, old and broken, and then what? I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto hers with a steadiness that made her flinch. Then at least I will have tried. At least I will know that I lived for myself, even if only for a moment. And that is more than you will ever understand. The air was electric, the night heavy with truths that could never be unsaid. And in that moment, I realized that my second chance had already begun, not with Evelyn's phone call, not with some future trip, but right here, by choosing myself for the first time in decades. That night, after the storm of words had finally quieted, I sat alone in my chair long after Daniel and Melissa had left, staring at the empty plates still littering the table, the apple pie untouched, its golden crust now hardening with neglect. The silence pressed in on me, but instead of suffocating me, it felt strangely liberating, as though the air was finally clearing after years of smoke. For the first time in decades, I wasn't replaying my son's pleas or his wife's barbs. I wasn't wondering how to save them. I was thinking about myself, about Evelyn's laughter on the phone, about the image she painted of the Pacific waves rolling against the Oregon coast. The idea that I, Harold Thompson, a 72-year-old widower who had spent his life in one small town, might finally step onto a plane and see a horizon wider than my backyard filled me with a trembling excitement. The following morning I dug out my old leather suitcase from the closet, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar, and began folding my clothes. My hands shook as I placed shirts and trousers neatly inside, not from weakness but from nerves, from the realization that this wasn't a dream I could dismiss, it was happening. I even slipped in a brand new jacket I had bought months earlier but never worn, telling myself I'd save it for a special occasion. This was it. Meanwhile, Daniel began calling every day, his voice growing more frantic with each voicemail. At first he begged me to reconsider, to keep helping with the mortgage, just until he found work. When I didn't answer, the tone shifted to anger accusations that I was betraying him, that I was selfish, that I was abandoning my own blood for some fantasy. But by the end of the week, his messages were different, softer. He spoke of applying to every job he could find, of standing in line at restaurants, offices, construction sites, anything that would give him a paycheck. He admitted he had even gone to a community center for therapy, that he was finally facing the fact that his dependency had been like an addiction, eating away at his dignity. Listening to those words brought me no smug satisfaction, only a weary hope that maybe, just maybe, the ultimatum had finally forced him to wake up. Melissa, on the other hand, vanished from the calls entirely. Daniel finally admitted she had packed a bag and gone to stay with her parents, furious that the safety net she believed eternal had been ripped away. He sounded hollow when he told me, but I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry. She had mocked me, belittled me, and spent money like water while I sold my wife's wedding ring to keep her comfortable. If her parents wanted to take her back under their roof, let them. On the second week, I received a letter from the bank confirming that the automatic payments on the townhouse had been canceled. Reading it was like exhaling after holding my breath underwater too long. For the first time in months, my account would not bleed out for someone else's mistakes. That evening, I sat with a cup of tea and dialed Evelyn. Her voice, warm and bright, carried across the miles. When I told her I had booked a flight, she laughed with joy, saying she couldn't wait to show me the garden she had planted, the coastline she walked every morning, the little bookshop where she spent her afternoons. I felt my lips curl into a smile that reached my eyes, a smile I hadn't known in years. Preparing for the trip gave me energy I thought was gone forever. I polished the old shoes I had been wearing thin, bought a fresh notebook to record my thoughts, even visited the barber for the first time in months. The man in the mirror still bore the lines of age, but there was color in his cheeks, light in his eyes, a spark that looked suspiciously like hope. Daniel came to visit 2 days before my departure. He looked thinner, his shoulders hunched, his clothes wrinkled, but there was something different about his eyes, a humility that hadn't been there before. He sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where so many fights had erupted, and told me he had found work cleaning offices at night. The pay was small, but it was his. He had rented a single room downtown and was learning to budget every dollar. "It's not much, Dad," he said, his hands trembling as he wrapped them around the coffee mug I had given him. "But it's mine, and for the first time in years, I don't feel like a child hiding behind excuses." Hearing him made something inside me soften, but I held firm. I told him I was proud of the step, but that the journey was long, and that I couldn't rescue him if he faltered again. He nodded, his eyes glistening, and for once he didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and pushed it across the table. "Read this on the plane," he said, his voice low. "It's easier for me to write than to say." I tucked it into my jacket pocket, feeling its weight like a secret promise. That night, as I zipped my suitcase and placed it by the door, I looked around the house one last time. Every corner held a memory: my wife's laughter in the kitchen, Daniel's footsteps racing down the hall as a boy, the creak of the rocking chair where I once dreamed of a peaceful retirement. But instead of sorrow, I felt something else: readiness. Tomorrow, I would walk through the airport gates, step onto a plane, and leave behind not just a house, but the burden of being everyone's savior. Tomorrow, I would take my first step toward being Harold again. The morning of my flight arrived with a clear sky and a soft breeze that seemed to whisper promises of change. Daniel showed up early, carrying a small bouquet of white daisies, my late wife's favorite, and for a moment the gesture nearly undid me. He placed them in my hands awkwardly, as though unsure if he even had the right, then offered to drive me to the airport. The ride was quiet at first, filled with ordinary chatter about traffic and weather, but underneath it all pulsed a tension neither of us could ignore. When we finally reached the terminal, Daniel carried my suitcase to the check-in line, his hands trembling as he set it down. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, "no matter what happens in Portland, I want you to know this. Seeing you this excited, this alive, it's already worth it. I haven't seen that light in your eyes since I was a kid." We embraced, a long, fierce hug that spoke more than words ever could. Before I stepped through security, he handed me the folded letter he had promised, whispering, "Read it on the plane." I tucked it into my jacket pocket, nodded, and walked away with my heart both heavy and light. Hours later, as the plane lifted off and the town I had called home grew smaller beneath the clouds, I finally opened Daniel's letter. His handwriting was uneven but careful, as though every word had been carved from his soul. "Dad," it began, "I spent years believing love meant rescue. You always caught me, always softened the blows, and I thought that was what fathers were supposed to do. But now, I see that real love is letting go, even when it hurts. Real love is giving someone the chance to stand on their own, even if they fail. Thank you for finally loving me enough to stop saving me. Thank you for reminding me that I can save myself. No matter what, I want you to live your life now. You've earned it. Fly high, Dad, literally and figuratively. With all my love and respect, Daniel." Tears blurred the words, and I pressed the paper to my chest, the hum of the engines carrying me farther away from the past and closer to whatever waited ahead. When the plane touched down in Portland, I felt a nervous energy ripple through me. The terminal bustled with travelers, but my eyes found her instantly. Evelyn stood near the arrival gate, her silver hair shining under the lights, a bouquet of yellow roses cradled in her arms. The moment she saw me, her face lit up, and I recognized that smile. Even after 50 years, it was the same one that had once made me believe anything was possible. I walked toward her, my steps slow but steady, and when we embraced, it felt like time folded in on itself, collapsing decades into a single moment. "Harold," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "you look exactly like the boy I remember, only wiser." I laughed, the sound breaking free of me like sunlight through clouds. "And you," I replied, "are even more beautiful than my memory allowed." She pressed the roses into my hands, and together we walked out of the terminal, side by side, as though we had been doing it our entire lives. Outside, the cool Pacific air brushed my face, carrying with it the scent of salt and pine, and for the first time in years I felt not like a weary old man, but like someone at the beginning of a journey. The past still lingered, yes, but it no longer chained me. Ahead lay something new, fragile but real, a chance at love, at joy, at rediscovering the man I had always been beneath the weight of sacrifice. And as Evelyn's hand slipped into mine, warm and sure, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready to meet it. The days that followed in Portland felt like stepping into another lifetime, one I had once believed was long lost to me. Evelyn welcomed me into her world with a grace that soothed every raw edge inside me. She showed me her home, a warm cottage perched on a hill overlooking the Willamette River, its windows filled with sunlight and shelves lined with books. Each evening she cooked simple meals, nothing extravagant, but they were flavored with laughter, and that was more nourishing than anything I had tasted in years. We walked through the Saturday market, the air rich with roasted coffee and handmade crafts, and she introduced me to friends who treated me not as a stranger or a burden, but as a man with stories worth hearing. One afternoon she drove me to the coast, and for the first time in my 72 years, I stood on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, the wind whipping through my hair as the waves roared endlessly against the rocks. I felt small and infinite all at once, and I realized how much of life I had missed by chaining myself to duty alone. Evelyn stood beside me, her hand in mine, and whispered, "See, Harold, the world is still wide open, even for us." Her words sank deep, lifting something heavy off my chest. At night we sat on her porch watching the sun sink in streaks of orange and violet, and she would ask me about my years as a carpenter, about the furniture I had built, about the love I had once shared with my late wife. She listened with an attentiveness I had almost forgotten existed, and with every conversation I felt pieces of myself returning, fragments of the man I had been before sacrifice consumed me. Daniel called once during those first 2 weeks. His voice was steadier, his words chosen carefully. He told me he was still working nights, still attending therapy, still trying to put together a version of himself that was worthy of respect. He didn't ask for money, didn't plead for help, only said, "I want you to know, Dad, I'm trying, and I'm glad you're happy." It was the first time I believed he meant it. When I hung up the phone, Evelyn smiled softly at me. "He'll find his way," she said. "Sometimes the hardest gift a parent can give is freedom." I nodded, realizing that in my attempt to protect Daniel, I had almost destroyed both of us. Now, by letting go, I had given him the chance to finally stand, and for myself, I had taken the chance to feel alive again. 6 months later, as summer sunlight painted the Oregon coast in gold, I found myself packing a different suitcase, not to return to my old life, but to bring the few possessions I truly valued into this new one. Daniel came to help, his face leaner, his eyes clearer, his demeanor steadier. He carried boxes with a quiet determination, never once asking for anything. As we loaded the final bag, he turned to me and said, "You know what's funny? By letting you go, I finally feel like I got you back. Not the father who rescued me, but the man who showed me what strength really is." His words stayed with me long after he left, long after I unpacked in Evelyn's home and set my old life to rest. For the first time, I wasn't just a father, a widower, or a provider. I was Harold again, a man who had rediscovered his worth, his joy, and the truth that it is never too late to begin anew. Life often takes us through winding roads we never expected, and sometimes it takes one moment of pain, one moment of humiliation, to wake us up to the truth we've been ignoring. Harold's journey began with heartbreak at his own dinner table, yet it led him to discover something far greater than bitterness or resentment. He discovered freedom, dignity, and the courage to reclaim the life he had almost forgotten was his. At 72, he stood at the edge of the Pacific Ocean for the first time, not as a weary man who had spent decades carrying everyone else's burdens, but as someone reborn into possibility. And in that transformation, we see a reminder for all of us. It's never too late to set boundaries, to let go of toxic relationships, and to pursue joy unapologetically. Whether through the wisdom of age or the courage to start fresh, Harold showed that second chances are real, and happiness does not belong only to the young, it belongs to the brave. His story isn't just about breaking free from disrespect or neglect. It's about rediscovering self-worth, about proving that even after years of sacrifice, one can still choose themselves and build something new. And perhaps that's the lesson we should carry with us tonight. If you are standing at a crossroads, if you've been made to feel small, remember Harold, and remember that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. Before we close, I want to thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. Stories like Harold's remind us why it's so important to keep listening, keep learning, and keep sharing. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own life in a new way, then please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support not only helps us keep telling powerful stories, it builds a community where no one feels alone in their struggles. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to begin again.